different lives. His mother, Ann Dunham, was a curious and determined young woman from Kansas, raised with Midwestern values of resilience and independence. His father, Barack Obama Sr., was a brilliant student from Kenya who had come to the United States to chase education and ambition. Their union was brief, their worlds too far apart. By the time young Barack was just a toddler, his father had gone, leaving Ann to raise her son with little more than determination and hope. Barack's childhood unfolded in fragments, as though he were living several different lives at once. In Hawaii, he knew the sound of the waves, the warmth of the sand, and the laughter of his grandparents who stepped in when Ann was struggling. But when Ann remarried, Barack found himself in Indonesia, a place full of contradictions, colorful street markets, crowded classrooms, and neighbors who shared little but kindness. Jakarta was both fascinating and harsh. Chickens roamed through muddy streets while military men patrolled with rifles slung over their shoulders. His mother worked tirelessly to give him an education, even teaching him English lessons late at night when local schools fell short. Yet, amid the noise of two worlds, Barack was haunted by absence. His father was a mystery, a figure more myth than man. Barack Sr. returned only once, when Barack was 10 years old. The visit was brief, just a few weeks, but it left a mark. For a boy who carried his father's name but not his presence, the encounter was both a gift and a wound. When his father left again, this time for good, Barack was left with more questions than answers. Back in Hawaii, Barack moved in with his grandparents, Stanley and Madeline Dunham. They were not wealthy, but they gave him stability. His grandfather filled his head with stories of courage and adventure, trying to awaken confidence in his grandson. His grandmother, disciplined and practical, woke up early each morning to work at a bank, modeling the value of quiet perseverance. They wanted Barack to grow into someone steady, someone sure of himself. But inside, he was still wrestling with who he was. At school, Barack's differences stood out. His skin was darker than most of his classmates, and he often felt like an outsider, caught between identities. Some days he joked his way through, masking uncertainty with charm. Other days he withdrew, staring out classroom windows, wondering where he truly belonged. Was he Hawaiian? American? Kenyan? Something in between? The question was always there, silent but sharp. Adolescence brought its storms. By high school, Barack sometimes drifted, dabbling in mischief, falling into moments of recklessness, searching for a sense of direction that often slipped from his grasp. Friends remembered him as thoughtful but distant, a young man who carried weight beyond his years. Behind the easy smile and the cool exterior, there was conflict. He was chasing belonging in parties and distractions, yet deep down he knew those moments could not answer the questions gnawing at him. The answers began to take shape in quiet corners of libraries. Barack discovered writers whose words reached into his confusion and offered mirrors for his own struggle. James Baldwin, Ralph Ellison, Malcolm X, voices that spoke of identity, race, struggle, and survival. He devoured their stories, underlining passages, scribbling notes in margins, as if each book could guide him closer to understanding himself. Words became his compass, and the world of ideas gave him a clarity that life had not yet offered. Still, the path ahead remained uncertain. College was on the horizon, and with it, the chance to leave Hawaii behind and search for something new. The boy who had been raised between Kansas values, Kenyan blood, Hawaiian landscapes, and Indonesian lessons was about to step into another world entirely. He did not yet know what future awaited him, but he was beginning to sense that his life would not be defined by what was missing. Instead, it would be shaped by the strength he was building piece by piece, page by page. For Barack Obama, childhood was not just a time of innocence. It was a crucible, a place where questions of belonging and identity collided with the reality of absence and struggle. But it was also where he began to discover resilience. From a mother who sacrificed, from grandparents who steadied him, and from books that lit his imagination, he learned that no matter how uncertain the world felt, there was always a way forward. And so, as the boy from Hawaii packed his bags to step into adulthood, he carried with him not just uncertainty but possibility. His journey was still unfolding, and the world had not yet noticed him. But the foundation had been laid. The boy with questions was preparing to become a man with answers. When Barack Obama left Hawaii, he carried with him more questions than certainties. His first stop was Los Angeles, where he attended Occidental College. The campus was vibrant, politically alive, full of students debating the state of America in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Barack was drawn to the conversations, to the voices calling for justice and change. Yet he was still searching for his own. At Occidental, he began to taste the world of activism, rallies against apartheid in South Africa, debates about civil rights, arguments about America's role in shaping the world. Friends remember him as someone who listened more than he spoke, but when he did speak, his words carried unusual weight. There was a depth to him, a thoughtfulness that hinted at the leader he would one day become. Still, something inside told him he needed to push further. Barack transferred to Columbia University in New York City. The shift was dramatic. Manhattan was a city of endless noise and constant motion. Barack walked its streets with a book tucked under his arm, often pausing in small diners to read, think, and write. He studied political science, but he was also studying himself, his place in a country that seemed fractured, his identity in a city that both welcomed and tested him. His apartment was modest, sometimes barely heated, but he endured. The solitude of New York gave him discipline, and the city's diversity offered him perspective. Still, after graduation, Barack faced a crossroads. He could chase a comfortable life, but the pull of purpose was stronger. He wanted to serve, to make a difference. That pull carried him to Chicago, a city of steel and struggle. The factories were closing, neighborhoods were hurting, and families were left behind. Barack arrived not with a grand title, but with the humble role of community organizer. The work was gritty and thankless. His pay was low, his responsibilities heavy. He sat in church basements with weary parents, walked the worn streets of the South Side, and listened to people who felt forgotten by their government. Sometimes the progress was invisible, sometimes the frustration boiled over. But Barack stayed. He learned to listen before he spoke, to organize before he led. Slowly, he began to build trust. And in doing so, he learned the most important lesson of those years. Change begins not with speeches, but with listening to people's stories. It was also in Chicago that faith became a deeper part of his life. In Reverend Jeremiah Wright's church, Barack found a community that gave him grounding and reminded him that the fight for justice was not only political, but also spiritual. The young man who once felt untethered in Hawaii was beginning to root himself in something larger than himself. But Barack's ambition continued to grow. He applied to Harvard Law School, unsure if he would belong there, but determined to try. When he was accepted, he walked into a place where history and power converged, and there, he carved his own piece of history. In 1990, Barack Obama was elected the first black president of the Harvard Law Review. It was a milestone that made headlines across the nation. Cameras flashed, reporters wrote stories, and suddenly the once quiet boy from Hawaii was a symbol of possibility. Yet, Barack remained cautious. Titles were not enough. Purpose still mattered more. During this time, fate introduced him to Michelle Robinson, a young lawyer from Chicago who was as brilliant as she was grounded. She was strong, ambitious, deeply connected to her roots, and initially skeptical of the man who carried dreams bigger than most. But Barack's sincerity, his vision, and his steady humor drew her in. Their partnership was not just romantic, it was built on mutual respect and shared ideals. Michelle challenged him, steadied him, and stood beside him as he continued to grow. After Harvard, Barack could have chosen wealth and prestige, but he returned to Chicago instead. He taught constitutional law, worked with churches and neighborhoods, and kept organizing. He was beginning to balance two lives, one as a husband building a family, and another as a man stepping closer to public service. The restless boy from Hawaii had grown into a man who carried himself with quiet conviction. He was no longer searching for identity in the same way. His heritage, once a source of doubt, had become a source of strength. His time in Chicago, his years at Harvard, his love for Michelle, all of it shaped him into someone who now believed he could make a difference not just in one community, but across the nation. The world beyond Chicago was waiting. The young organizer who once knocked on doors in South Side neighborhoods was beginning to envision something larger, a future in politics. He did not yet know how far it would take him, but the pull of destiny was becoming impossible to ignore. Chicago was the city where Barack Obama had grown roots, but it was also the place where he would test his wings in politics. After returning from Harvard, he began teaching constitutional law at the University of Chicago, walking into classrooms with chalk on his hands and ideas burning in his mind. Students described him as approachable, yet captivating, a professor who connected the complexities of law to the realities of people's lives. At the same time, he remained active in the community, working with local leaders and churches. But ambition called. In 1996, Barack won a seat in the Illinois State Senate. It was a small step compared to his later journey, but an important one. In those years, he walked the hallways of the state capitol, learning the language of politics, negotiation, compromise, persistence. He focused on legislation that impacted ordinary people, healthcare for children, ethics reform, and programs to support working families. Still, progress came slowly, and the grind of politics sometimes tested his patience. Not everything went his way. In 2000, he took a leap and ran for the U.S. House of Representatives. The campaign was tough, and Barack lost by a wide margin. The defeat stung deeply. For weeks, he questioned whether he had misread his calling. Was he chasing an impossible dream? The young man who once wrestled with identity was now wrestling with purpose again. Yet failure, as he had learned before, was not the end. It was a teacher. Barack threw himself back into work, teaching, writing, and reflecting. And then, 4 years later, everything changed. In 2004, he was invited to give the keynote address at the Democratic National Convention in Boston. Barack Obama stepped onto that stage as a relatively unknown state senator from Illinois. By the time he finished speaking, the nation knew his name. His words about unity, hope, and the possibility of America electrified the audience. Commentators called it the birth of a political star. The speech opened doors. Later that year, he was elected to the U.S. Senate, representing Illinois. His presence in Washington, D.C., was different. He was young, thoughtful, and carried himself with humility. Colleagues noticed his willingness to listen as much as he spoke. Yet beyond the Capitol, a movement was brewing. His message of hope resonated far beyond Illinois. People began to whisper, could this man be president one day? In 2007, standing before the steps of the old state capitol in Springfield, Barack Obama announced his candidacy for President of the United States. The odds were stacked against him. He was young. He was relatively new to national politics. And he was running against well-established figures. Many dismissed him as inexperienced, idealistic, even naive. But Barack believed in something larger than himself, and millions of Americans began to believe too. His campaign was unlike anything the country had seen. Fueled not by lobbyists or elites, but by ordinary people, it became a grassroots movement. College students, factory workers, teachers, and retirees poured their energy into it. They knocked on doors, made phone calls, and filled stadiums. His slogan, "Yes, we can," was more than words. It became a rallying cry. For the first time, many people felt their voices truly mattered in shaping the future of America. The road was brutal. The primaries tested him, the media scrutinized him, and opponents doubted him at every turn. But Barack's calm steadiness, his ability to inspire without anger, carried him through. And then, in November 2008, history was made. Standing before a sea of supporters in Chicago's Grant Park, Barack Obama was elected the 44th President of the United States, the first African American to hold the office. That night, tears streamed down faces young and old. Elderly men and women who had lived through segregation wept as they watched the son of a Kenyan father and a woman from Kansas become president. Around the world, people celebrated, believing that perhaps America was capable of living up to its ideals. The presidency was not easy. Barack inherited wars abroad and the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. Every decision carried weight, and not every promise could be fulfilled. Opposition in Washington was fierce, compromise often elusive. Yet even in struggle, the symbolism of his presidency endured. He signed into law reforms that expanded health care, pushed for cleaner energy, and worked tirelessly to stabilize the economy. Through it all, Barack remained anchored by Michelle and their daughters, Malia and Sasha. The White House was not just a place of power, but also their family's home. Michelle balanced the spotlight with grace, carving her own legacy as a champion for children's health and education. Together, they reminded the nation that leadership was also about love, humility, and humanity. When Barack Obama left office in 2017, he did so with a legacy that went far beyond policies. His story was proof that beginnings do not define endings. From a boy searching for belonging in Hawaii, to a young man organizing in Chicago, to the President of the United States, his life embodied the power of resilience, faith, and hope. Barack Obama's journey was never just about him. It was about the millions of people who saw in his story a reflection of their own struggles and possibilities. It was about the idea that no matter where you start, no matter the obstacles in your path, it is possible to rise. And in the end, Barack Obama's greatest message was not simply "Yes, we can," but "Yes, you can."